This meeting is being recorded. Good morning, everybody. Welcome, and welcome to the folks who might be watching this on our Met How at Home YouTube channel. I'm Tracy Sprower from Met How at Home, and I'm really excited this morning. We have Eli Loftus from Okanagan County Conservation District with the wildfire program here to talk to us about being prepared for wildfires, since we live in a wildfire dependent ecology here in the Met How Valley. It's great for us to adapt to that reality. And so I will hand it over to you, Eli, and let you introduce yourself and the Conservation District and what you're up to over there, and go ahead and dive into your program. I'm looking forward to this. Thanks so much for being here.
Well, thank you. Yeah, so howdy, folks. I'm Eli Loftus. I'm the Wildfire and Community Resiliency Lead for the Okanagan Conservation District. Let's see here. Go back to that. Screen share. Yep, so I'm the Wildfire Lead for the Okanagan Conservation District. For those of you who might not aware, the Okanagan Conservation District covers the entirety of Okanagan County, except for a couple of the municipalities that haven't been annexed in. So private and public land in Okanagan County is part of the Conservation District. We're based out of Okanagan. I'm talking to you here today from our office right across the street from the Superior Court. And I'll be talking to you all here today about Okanagan CD and our wildfire preparedness and recovery programming that we offer as a district, and just some general information about how to be wildfire ready, how to be resilient towards wildfire here on a fire-prone landscape. So I'll start off just a little bit about what conservation districts are. There are conservation districts all over the country, but they're not necessarily the most well-known of government entities. They're ultimately a product of the New Deal. They go all the way back to the Dust Bowl. Back in 1933, the Soil Erosion Service was established within the Department of the Interior by Dr. H.H. Bennett, who's the gentleman in that suit there in the top photo. And it was to help farmers in the aftermath of the Dust Bowl begin to restore soil that had been so grievously damaged by, the loss of the bison and intensive agriculture out on the Great Plains in the late 18 and early 1900s. 1935, the Soil Erosion Service was transferred over from the Department of the Interior to the Department of Agriculture and renamed the Soil Conservation Service. For some reason, put social instead, just noticed that. 1994, that agency was again renamed to the Natural Resource Conservation Service. And the Conservation District here actually shares our office building with the Natural Resource Conservation Service that covers Okanagan, Ferry, and Douglas counties. In 1937, President Roosevelt encouraged state governors to establish state-level soil conservation districts based off of the model that had been developed by the Soil Conservation Service at the Department of Agriculture, and also Congress created a model conservation district law that could be used by the states to form them. In 1939, Washington authorized conservation districts to form, and here in Okanagan County in 1940, the Loomis Conservation District was established. The Loomis Conservation District was the first CD here in Okanagan County, and several more were formed in the early 1940s, and over time, those conservation districts coalesced by the mid-1970s into the modern Okanagan Conservation District. And so we have been practicing cooperative conservation here at Okanagan CD since 1940. We have many different programs. We're tasked with developing programs to voluntarily assist landowners and others with conserving all natural resources. So really, we are meant to try to address whatever major natural resource concerns the residents of Okanagan County have. We're governed by a board of 5 volunteer supervisors per our bylaws, 3 of whom have to be directly involved in farming, ranching, or other natural resource industries. And our programs range everything from K through 12 education, fire resiliency, irrigation efficiencies, agriculture, rangeland management, and many others. In our nearly 100 years, we've done a lot. We've worked on a lot of the landscapes here in Okanagan County. You probably driving along whichever highway you happen to frequent here in Okanagan County will drive past an Okanagan Conservation District project that's either active or now long into its lifespan, not even realizing it. And considering that we are meant to address major conservation concerns, and considering the subject matter, the majority of this presentation, you can probably guess what one of our main programs is, and that is our wildfire program. But you'll see here just in these photographs, just visual examples of what we do. We're very popular at the Okanagan County Fair, that middle photo there, because we're the poop people. We have our Whose Scat Is That activity, which is renowned amongst the young children of Okanagan County for its fun, I guess. But then also we are very much out on the land working on cost shares. One of the main things that I do is recovery cost shares for post-fire impacts and fire impacts to agriculture infrastructure, mainly fencing. Restoration of fencing on the landscape is vital for ensuring that rangeland is properly managed after a fire. And also it helps benefit wildlife when we're able to, we install wildlife-friendly fences to enable the movement of deer, pronghorn moose, and other animals across the landscape. And then it's just a lot of outreach and education. I'm very active in the Methow Valley, especially in our Firewise USA communities. But you'll encounter me or my coworkers out and about pretty much everywhere here in Okanagan County, doing something for somebody when it comes to conservation. So our wildfire program has a lot of different aspects. Primarily, our services include wildfire risk assessments to existing homes. So that's me or my colleague Dylan Streeter coming on out, having a look and assessing the susceptibility of a home to being negatively impacted by a wildfire and what the property owner can do in order to reduce that risk. We will also do pre-construction site visits. We'd actually prefer to do those more, to be perfectly honest, because we can kind of head folks off at the pass before they perhaps make decisions when it comes to their building strategy that may actually increase their risk. We also will provide forest health assessments. So we'll go on out and not only look at the structures, look at the overall health of the forest or woodland or whatever ecosystem you happen to have, say sagebrush, and provide recommendations about how you can manage the fuels in those areas to continue the ecological viability of those systems, but also then reduce the risk that those fuel loads present to a building. We provide resources for home hardening against wildfire. Right now, that is mostly technical resources, but we actually do have a new grant from FEMA to provide home hardening cost shares, so help folks financially be able to do some of the work that they can do to reduce the risk of their homes. It's targeted at specific areas of Okanagan County. So if you're living in the Twist watershed or in the Sun Mountain Ranch Club, you actually would qualify for receiving a cost share on certain things to help reduce risk, like replacing vents and a couple of other things that I'll actually discuss here later on in the presentation. We work significantly with the Firewise USA certification program. There are about 16 Firewise USA sites here in Okanagan County. The first was Chilwist, which is down by Malott. The remainder of them that are at least officially certified are up in the Methow. And those communities are able to work with amongst one another to develop plans for fire resiliency at a neighborhood or community level. And then by receiving their Firewise USA certification from the National Fire Protection Association, they're able to get access to grants, both from the NFPA and then agencies like the Department of Natural Resources, to do frequent fuel reduction work and other activities that help reduce risk from wildfire at a community level. And then also the aspect of my job that I do have to do and that I regret, but it's very necessary here, is my post-fire site visits and recovery recommendations. If you are impacted by a wildfire here in Okanagan County, you can request the Conservation District come out after the fire and provide you with an assessment of the immediate hazards. We very often think about wildfire in the moment as, you know, the flames and the embers, but there are going to be a multitude of hazards that exist on a burnt landscape to both life and limb and property. And so we can help you identify those risks as a property owner, be that hazard trees on roadways, hydrophobic soils that can lead to flooding or mudslides, and any other things, but also then provide recommendations and hopefully, if we have them available, resources about how to begin to recover that landscape from wildfire. The landscapes here of Okanagan County are into themselves naturally pretty resilient. They are meant to have fire on them. But considering the scale and the scope of wildfire that we experience here in Okanagan County and the intensities of those fires, sometimes nature does need a helping hand in getting that process started. And that's where the conservation district tries to assist property owners. And so a lot of what I do is based around a concept called community resilience. And that concept takes a lot of different forms, but it has really three main tenets, and at least in my mind. The ecological, the structural, and the social. So we talk about how ecologically the landscapes of Okanagan County are suited and adapted to wildfire. According to the EPA, there are 11 distinct ecosystems in Okanagan County. The majority of them have fire as a natural disturbance agent in them. Fire is meant to be there. Through fire suppression in the 20th century, we have disrupted those natural systems. And so we now bear the result of more intense wildfires, that are more frequent, intense, that are disruptive. And so we look to how can we help the ecosystems here in Okanagan County be resilient towards wildfire and to spring back up afterwards. That little tuft of bunch grass, it burned off the top, but its roots are still viable. It's going to grow back. But also then we look at structurally what community resilience means. And you can take structure to mean, governmental structure, but then also just literally structures themselves, which is what we do a lot of our home risk assessments for. And then also social. Like I said, the landscape itself is resilient to wildfire. Humans, not necessarily so much. It is something that we do have to learn very often as individuals and as community members to be able to deal with. Fire is traumatic. Fire is something that is very visceral and can, it scares the hell out of you when you get up close to it. Especially I've tangled with wildfire a couple of times myself, and I've been on prescribed fires, and I thankfully have never had, a loss of a home or a loss of any of my property to it, but it can be a frightening thing. But having to learn how we can not just purely operate around fear around wildfire, not simply respond to wildfire in a moment of crisis, but scope ourselves, our communities, and our county to be able to be socially able to be resilient to that wildfire so that we can continue to safely and happily live on this landscape together. And so all three of these elements, ecological, structure, and social, come together to create community resilience. And so you hear me talk a lot today about home hardening. You may be more familiar with this concept actually being called fire-wising. The wonderful folks at the NFPA actually decided to copyright the term fire-wise, and so we do not use it at the Conservation District or DNR anymore. In that context, we now use home hardening. Bit of semantics, but it's important sometimes. So the style, age, level of maintenance, and landscape conditions dictate how resilient a structure is to wildlife. Embers are the biggest risk to structures. We very often have an image of wildfire as just being that imposing wall of flame just advancing towards buildings. And buildings are a threat from a flame front, but really it is actually the embers. It is the small bits of burning material that are being carried by wind currents or the convective heat of the fire away from the flames and can push miles and miles ahead of that flame front. They get into things, they get under decks, they get sucked into vents and up into attics, and they smolder. They don't necessarily immediately cause something to burn. Very often houses will burn down 3 or 4 days after the fires actually passed them by because an ember managed to find that little crevice where there was a bit of fuel lying there and smolder and then burn. And all the resources that could have helped fight that fire are now miles away or have left the area altogether if it was a brief fire event. So preventing entry of those embers into structures and denying them fuel in the exterior is the most vital thing that you can do for your home. And you'll see 3 homes here. We've got from all over Okanagan County, the one at the very top that if Some of you may know Ken Bevis, who is the stewardship biologist for the Department of Natural Resources. That's his home. That's home survived the Rising Eagle fire. The home in the middle there, that belongs to a gal named Barb Green. She's a retired firefighter from Olympia. Her and her husband were impacted by fire several years back before the house was built on that landscape. And this is up north of the Sinlahegan Wildlife Refuge in northern Okanagan County. And then you'll see a home here. The owners of this home, their home was burnt to the ground in Carlton Complex, and they rebuilt. And this is at the bottom of Chilliwack over by Malott. So all of these homes have elements of home hardening that, in the case of Ken Bevis's home, saved his from burning during Rising Eagle. And for the owners of the other two that were incorporated in the aftermath of fires, once they had seen what they can do here on the landscapes of Okanagan. And so you see here in this little graphic, each one of these little flames, about 22 of them, represent spots where embers can attack, where they can become a risk to a house. Every house is different. They're constructed differently, but you'll see many of these common elements in most homes that you'll see in Okanagan County and in really Western North America. We'll see roof pitches, skylights, decking material, trash cans even. All of this, and also especially outdoor plantings, fuel sources like wood piles, all of this is material that embers can, if they get access to, can smolder or burn. And it is frightening, to see that, to realize that there are a lot of ways that this can go south real quick. But by taking action, by working towards home resiliency and home hardening, you can dramatically reduce the risks. There is no 100% way to reduce risk of wildfire impacts unless you decide to build your house underground and entirely out of concrete. That is the only way. But it does not have to be. And so when we talk about fire resiliency in a property or a home context, we talk about defensible space, and we create defensible space in 3 zones, 1, 2, and 3. Zone 1 is the most vital zone. Very often when people come to me to talk about fire resiliency for their home, they're facing the wrong direction. They're looking out into the forest. They're looking out towards their neighbor's house or whatever's going on across the road. Whenever you're thinking about improving your fire resiliency, don't look out, look in. Go to the edge of your property and look back at your house. Look from 3 into 1, not 1 into 2 and 3. Especially in zone 1, if action is not taken in zone 1, the actions taken in zone 2 and 3 don't matter. You can have a manicured lawn. You can have a forest woodland around your home that doesn't have ladder fuels and doesn't have a lot of avenues for fire to move. But if you don't remove the fuel, if you don't remove that wood pile that's right up against the house, if you don't take out the pine needles that are built up or screen in your vents, it doesn't really matter. All 3 of those zones are vital, but zone 1 really is the most important, because it is your first and last line of defense. We start out defining zone 1 as being 0 to 5 feet away from the exterior walls and from the edges of porches and decks. Flammable material in this zone should be heavily managed, if not entirely removed. It's very important to help prevent this, because really when we talk about the embers, so here, this is where we're trying to make sure that if embers land, they have nothing to burn. Wood piles, ornamental plantings, all of those can provide fuel, but also because it's a risk of what can happen once that material begins to burn. The siding is right there. It can burn or smolder. Windows, plate glass windows crack at 180 degrees Fahrenheit. Double pane windows at about 630 degrees Fahrenheit. If a fire breaks out in that 5-foot zone, it can produce enough radiant heat to cause glass to crack. And when that glass cracks, that gives embers a very easy means of getting into a building. And we encourage folks to create defensible space in this first zone by putting down inflammable barriers of gravel, pavers, stone, really any other hardy, non-flammable material that you can use to create that buffer. And you can see here for the photo at the top, I mean, there is wood. People very often, they're just like, oh, we can't build with wood. Wood is a perfectly acceptable building material on a wildfire-prone landscape, but you have to control the fuels around it. So this home here, I mean, you see, there's a little wood frame resting on top of there on the corner, but really other than the siding itself, there is not much flammable material in this photograph. You've got a gravel barrier. You've got a fence made out of metal that touches the siding. Fences are wick. If you have a wood fence that connects to a building, if that fence catches fire, it can move through the fence and catch that building alight. So what we highly recommend for folks is not necessarily don't build wood fences, but if you're going to connect them to a building, the last 6 to 8 feet, so if you have a gate or anything like that, should be entirely of metal construction. That can dramatically reduce that fence wick issue for wildfire. But it's all about controlling the fuel in that area. And a major hidden hazard in zone 1 are decks and porches. Decks and porches are wonderful for their aesthetics and recreational use, but depending on their construction, they are very easy places for burnable material to hide and for embers to find them. They allow pine needles, leaves, pine cones, and other flammable material to be hidden out of view, and embers can get easily blown or sucked under there, smolder for days, and ignite. So what we suggest is that if you have a wood-based or even a hardy board-based patio, because hardy board will eventually melt when subjected to high enough temperatures, that you fully enclose a deck or porch to the ground whenever possible, using additional wood, metal, stone, whatever you can. Or if you're unable to do that, just due to the way that your home is constructed, that you screen in as much of your porch as you can with 1/8 inch stainless steel mesh, metal flashing. 1/8 inch stainless steel is small enough that it prevents embers from being able to pass through and into an area. Most homes, if you have, soffit vents, gable vents, crawl spaces, if you have screens over them, it's likely 1/4 inch stainless steel. The 1/4 inch stuff is good. It will stop some embers, but it won't stop the majority of them. So we highly recommend that folks transition over to the 1/8 inch stainless steel if you're able to. It also is good, for controlling critters, keeping squirrels, birds, and rattlesnakes out. I assessed a house actually in the Mazama area last year, and there was a rattlesnake in one of their crawl spaces. So if you'd rather prevent our reptilian friends from joining you in the evenings, that might be another possibility if you're with the 1/8 stainless steel. And also the same thing is true for the windows. Most window screens are made out of vinyl. Vinyl has some resistance to fire. It will melt when susceptible to high enough temperatures. And then the other problem with it is that it degrades over time due to exposure to UV light. So while 1/8 inch stainless screen window screens are harder to come by, it's another thing that we do recommend folks transition to over time if they're able to. And let's see here. So we move on to zone 2, which is what we call the lean, clean, and green zone. This is going to be 5 to 30 feet away from the building. So fire in this zone is still hot enough that if it ignites, that it can produce temperatures that will damage the siding or crack windows. So here is where you're able to have that vegetation, but you need to make sure that it's well managed. It needs to stay irrigated. It needs to stay lean. It's about controlling it, not eliminating it. And so it's a lot about plant selection. A lot of the native plants here in Okanagan County are naturally fire resistant, so they're less likely to burn. We do have some plant species that are actually pyrophilic, so they actually are more likely to burn because it assists in their reproductive strategies. But really, it's not as much the natives. It's very often the non-native ornamental species that we use that are not flammable, that are not fire resistant. But you can select low-growing native and non-native plants like this phlox here that's planted in gravel beds. We highly recommend that you don't use wood mulch within 30 feet of a building unless it's very well irrigated like in a garden situation, because wood mulch will burn. Some folks will also have the idea of utilizing rubberized mulch, like the ground up tires and stuff that like you see on playgrounds and stuff. Unfortunately, that material is sometimes advertised as being fire resistant. It is not. And when it burns, it actually produces toxic fumes that can be hazardous to human and animal health. So we highly recommend that if you have planted beds in the first two zones for any reason that you utilize gravel, rock, anything that is genuinely non-flammable and also can be kept wet. So it's all about landscaping on fire-prone landscapes, and it's about breaking up fuel layers in zone 2 and also in zone 3. Raking in needles and leaves and getting them out of the way from the structures is removing ground fuels. That is very helpful. Very often folks will come and ask me about, they're concerned about disturbing the duff layer. They're worried that if they remove the duff layer of needles and things like that, that they're going to be having a negative impact on wildlife. While that can be true in some cases, the benefits of raking up needles and leaves is far better in terms of wildfire recovery and resiliency, excuse me, than the trade-off of having some minor disruption to wildlife habitat. Especially, we don't encourage folks to rake down to bare soil. If you get the top layers, the material that's already underneath beginning to rot and break up, it's fine, but it's the dry, fresher material that's more of a hazard. It's flashier, so it will catch on fire more quickly. Irrigation keeps things green and will reduce risk. Plants that have water moving through their tissues that aren't in a summer dormancy period because of lack of water are going to be more resistant to wildfire. And you'll see in the photograph here, this is a plant that's actually in zone 1, but it does grow out all the way to being in zone 2. Arborvitaes, junipers, and eucalyptuses are absolutely, positively horrible when it comes to resiliency for wildfire. All of these plant species have various oils in their tissues that are incredibly flammable, and they will go up like a candle when they are exposed to flame, even if they are well irrigated. We highly recommend that if you have junipers, arborvitaes, eucalyptuses aren't very common here, but you never know, that you do remove them within the 30 feet of a building. They are just an extremely high risk. The native junipers, our Western juniper and our Rocky Mountain juniper, are valuable wildlife species. Their cones, their berries are utilized for many different things and also have culturally significant impacts for our indigenous peoples. But in terms of their proximity to structures, they are just a significant hazard. So we recommend to get rid of them. I am very, I am trained as a wildlife biologist and forester. Folks are concerned that when I go out to a property, I'm going to essentially show up with a metaphorical or literal axe and start chopping things. I very rarely do that, but it's the junipers, the arborvitaes, and the eucalyptuses that do get my dander up. Those are the plants that should be absolutely gone. And if you are curious about selecting wildfire resilient plants that are great for Eastern Washington and all of our different climate zones and planting zones, the Washington Department of Natural Resources has a very well put together list of wildfire resilient plants that was put together by DNR, the Cascadia Conservation District, our sister CD to the south in Chelan County, and the Washington State University Master Gardener Program.
Where can we get that list, Eli?
I can, once I'm done, I can post a link to it in the chat. And you can actually, if you're ever physically in our office, I have boxes and boxes of them that I will hand out because I have far too many. They gave me, it's like 40 to a box, and I have at least 6 boxes of them right now.
All right.
So as we move into zone 3, this is where the wild meets the lawn, essentially. It's the one zone where the size is variable, and that is due to positioning on slopes. Wildfire behaves differently on flat ground versus sloped ground. If you are at, wildfire moves faster uphill. So if you have a home that is built at the top of a slope that's right up on the apex of the slope, the fire begins at the bottom. Say that you're near the road. Say you're in parts of the Mettown near Highway 20, and someone flicks a cigarette out of the window, and it lands there on the side and smolders and smolders and then ignites. As that fire burns, its radiant heat rises up and warms the fuel that's above on the slope, making it easier for that to burn. So the fire then very quickly advances up that slope and encounters a home. And so that's one example where actually, in this case, it is actually the threat of the direct flame front making it to a building as opposed to the embers. say that you're a home that's built at the base of a slope, say that you're near a creek or on a bench that's, slope, bench, slope. When a fire is above you on the slope, fire will destabilize materials in the soil. So you can actually have, large rocks and other debris start to roll down, but then burning material will also roll downhill, make contact with the siding and ignite a building, propane, tanks, trailers, whatever. So if you are, depending on your relationship to a slope, your third zone will either be that 30 to 100 or 30 to 200. It also has some bearing on, if you're on a slope, if your trees are at the same, if the trees that are growing on that slope are, in line with that building, if there's a crown fire in those trees, that is a very easy avenue for the flames or embers to make contact with the building from a crown fire on a slope. So this work in zone 3 is all about reducing the intensity of wildfire if it enters that zone. With zone 1 and zone 2, it's about reducing intensity, but more so about trying to prevent wildfire impacts at those two zones altogether. Zone 3, for most folks, is just not practical to totally eliminate the risk. So in zone 3, you're trying to minimize it. And if fire does enter, it doesn't have an opportunity to advance into the next two zones. So that includes removing small trees. We love trees. Trees are wonderful. We have too many trees. In large parts of the Methow Valley, the Okanagan Valley, our forests, our woodlands are overstocked. So they are overly dense. They have far too many trees in them right now, that when a fire does come through, it will burn that forest up. Historically, before European settlement, fire would be on the landscape in a woodland or a forest here in Okanagan and throughout eastern Washington, depending on its elevation, every 7 to 14 years. And the further up in elevation you go, the longer that interval gets. When you get up to the subalpine or alpine here in Okanagan County, you're getting into fire return intervals of centuries as opposed to decades or a couple of years. Those periodic small fires would clean up the ground fuel, and then also would sort out and kind of, pick the winners and losers of the survivability of saplings and young trees. And so it created open forests and woodlands, not densely packed ones. Their canopies were far apart. There wasn't many ladder fuels, so those young trees that can then catch fire and then move fire to the tree above it. Those didn't exist, both due to fires resulting from lightning strikes, and then cultural use of prescribed burning, essentially by the tribal folks that have lived in the valley since time immemorial. So the disruption of European settlement and of the fire suppression of the 20th century allowed these dense fuel loads to build up. And so while we love our trees here in Okanagan County, especially around homes, there are too many of them very often. We have sympathy for those young trees, those saplings, but they are actually the biggest threat. Mature trees aren't the problem most of the time. A mature ponderosa pine and Douglas fir will survive mild to moderate fires. It's those younger trees who are low to the ground, who don't have thick enough bark, who will move fire into the canopy, that are the issue. So breaking them up, and you don't have to kill them all, don't have to cut them down, all of them down. But if you want to keep a couple here and there, create patches, islands of vegetation, not walls. And that helps the fire not have an avenue of fast travel through an area. Still provides habitat value for wildlife, provides you with aesthetics. If you're looking to trees or any other vegetation as a visual barrier, say from your neighbors or from the road, you can still have that as well. But it's all about making the conscious choice to not just have these big contiguous layers and walls of fuel around your property. And then there are other things that you can control as well. And I'll move on to some photographs here. So here you will see two different properties. The photograph on the right, you'll notice, so we're looking out into from the home into zones 2 and 3. And you'll see a couple of possible fuel sources, but they're fuel sources that are well enough away that they're not a threat. You've got propane tanks. Modern propane tanks, the risk of an explosive event of them popping off is actually quite low. The hazard with them is when they begin to vent their gas. They will get to a certain temperature and will start to vent gas from the top. That gas ignites, and so you have a shooting wall of flame coming out from the propane tank for a couple of minutes or seconds that could produce embers or anything else that could produce enough radiant heat if they're close enough to a building to damage it, crack glass and all that. But if they're more than 30 feet away, that risk is pretty much entirely reduced. We highly recommend that if you have propane tanks or for whatever reason, for home heating or recreational use, say for a barbecue or anything like that, if you have those small portable ones that they're stored away from buildings or are able to be easily moved into a building while there is a wildfire in the area. And for these large home heating based propane tanks that you create, just like a home, a 5-foot buffer around them. Gravel the base, make sure that vegetation isn't growing, because if there's anything there that can produce enough heat to cause the gas to start venting off, that is an issue. And from a firefighting perspective, even if there is not a risk of an explosive event, firefighters are not going to want to get anywhere near a propane tank that is at risk of venting off its gas and igniting. You'll also see wood piles. Again, if a wood pile is more than 30 feet away from a building, and without any other covering, pretty much good. They will catch on fire, but they will not produce enough radiant heat to cause damage. If you do need to keep your firewood near a building, we have a lot of folks in the Okanagan who heavily rely on wood heating, and it's just not practical to have it more than 30 feet away during the wintertime, when it's just not safe, really, especially to be wandering outside and tripping and falling, especially for a larger portion of our population who is elderly. If you are able to, we highly recommend that when you do not need your wood for home heating, that you move it somewhere else. You get it more than 30 feet away, or if you're able to store it in metal cabinets, or really anything that can prevent embers from making contact with it. The photograph on the right, this is Pine Stump Farms, which is on the Colville Reservation. The farm has been burnt many times over the years and had several major wildfire impacts. Albert Roberts, the owner of Pine Stump Farms, and his wife Carrie, actually Albert unfortunately passed away in an accident on his farm about 2 months ago. Albert was a graduate of Washington State University's forestry program, my alma mater as well, for the same program, and he very consciously reduced the fuels around his farmstead. You can see where there are burnt trees, but by reducing and breaking up the fuels and creating canopy space, Albert was able to prevent the fire having an easy means of travel forward and getting into his complex for his various barns and houses and things like that there. And while like I said, I talk a lot about fire resiliency, but unfortunately another major aspect of my job is fire recovery and the impacts of fire after the flames have gone out. And you'll see here just a couple of different examples. One of the major issues that we experience here in Okanagan County is post-wildfire flooding. When fire is on the landscape, mild to moderate fires will have impacts on the soil, but they don't damage them too severely. It's these unusually intense fires that we experience because of the fuel loading, climate change, and things like that, and fire suppression that cause the soil to be significantly negatively impacted. Fire will burn up the organic matter in soil, and that organic matter makes soil porous. It makes it able to retain water. So with the loss of that material, water becomes hydrophobic. It's not able to retain water, and the water will, what water is able to penetrate will penetrate, saturate, and what is not able to will sit on the top, and just the force of gravity brings it on down. And so that's why we experience mud flows, additional flooding, and other issues here in Okanagan County. And you can see some of these photos where these have been washouts, the rocks in the road. That's the Bonaparte Lake Road. I took that photo 3 weeks ago. And that was before it even started raining. That was a blowout caused entirely by spring snowmelt. And all of these post-wildfire impacts can be just as destructive as the wildfire itself. We are having homes destroyed by flooding. We are having homes destroyed by, mudslides bringing boulders as big as cars through people's buildings and things like that. And then there also is the reburn potential. A property can reburn just as quickly as it burned previously. We had about between 2014, the Carlton complex, and the Okanagan complex in 2015, about 1,000 acres reburned in Okanagan complex that had burned over during Carlton Complex. So just because you have experienced wildfire one year does not mean that because you have had burn impacts that it will not burn again as quickly as the next burn season. And so our post-fire services include, or at least our programming, depending on the time of the year and when we have funding, include working on post-fire flooding, noxious weed control, and reburns. Noxious weeds are a major issue here in Okanagan County. We have class A, B, and C here in the county. You know, we highly encourage folks to control their noxious weeds now so that they don't have to have a visit from the county noxious weed board and get fined. If you're seeing knapweed and other noxious weeds on your property, try to control them if you're able to. You can look up the state noxious weed list, and also then Okanagan County has its own separate noxious weed list that can be consulted, that can provide recommendations about how to best remove that material. We also assist landowners with qualified projects to recover from wildfire, mostly right now agricultural infrastructure, like I said, fencing, pumping plants, and things like that. It's all about being able to get folks, especially those ranchers who have been impacted by wildfire, back on their feet, able to manage their grazing and their water systems well, so that they are not only able to begin to continue to make a living on their landscape, but also continue to manage it as stewards who are able to work with it and not damage the landscape after it's been negatively impacted by fire. But you can see, so the red house there, that's Concanelli. The house, well, actually the roof of that house, this house was built, house was not even completed when it was destroyed by a mudslide near Concanelli back on the 4th of July last year. And so ending it with this fire recovery stuff, it does present a lot of doom and gloom and worry, unfortunately. But like I said at the start, we work towards community resilience. The landscapes of Okanagan County have evolved over thousands of years, before the last ice age even, to be adapted for wildfire. The wildlife of this landscape is mostly adapted to wildfire and very often benefits from it in the long term. And so do the native plant life. It's us as human beings, as people who have moved on to this landscape in greater and greater numbers, who have to be able to learn to deal with it. And our indigenous peoples knew how to deal with it for thousands of years, of course. But that's where Okanagan County, the Okanagan Conservation District comes in. We are here to assist you however we can in your conservation concerns, be it wildfire, irrigation, rangeland, wildlife, what have you. But we are always here to help. I might not be able to help financially, but I can provide technical assistance. I can provide knowledge and at least a helping hand and a smiling face for folks who have had these negative wildfire impacts, and that knowledge source and information for folks who are looking to make sure that they don't have to have that happen. I'm very much in the business of trying to prevent the worst day of people's lives. I do not like having to talk to the folks, to see the folks who have had to experience losing their homes, seeing their property that they've cared for decades at times be damaged by wildfire. It can be a heartbreaking thing, but I do take heart in knowing that this too shall pass and that this landscape can recover, and so can we. And so if you're interested in any of the services that I've talked to you all about here today, or any of the other non-wildfire related programs that the CD provides, you can get in contact with me or my colleague Dylan Streeter, or get in touch with us at our main office here in Okanagan. We'd be very happy to do whatever we can for you, wherever we can. But with that, I'm very happy to answer any questions y'all might have, or to keep on blabbering inanely until this goes to an end.
Wow, thank you, Eli. That was excellent. That was just really power packed, and I'm so grateful for the conservation district that we have one. I have a question. I'm just curious what the relationship the conservation district has with the Colville tribe, and are there any tribal members on the board, or yeah?
So currently the Colville Reservation, at least the Okanagan County portions, are within the boundaries of the conservation district. So we do serve folks on the reservation. The tribe also has its own separate conservation district. Its functionality is not as high as ours due to funding limitations. We don't currently have any Colville tribal members on our board. Albert Roberts, before he passed away, was a resident of the reservation. Who he was on our board before he passed. But we do work with the tribal government on various things. Right now, my primary field of work is actually not wildfire recovery or resiliency with the tribe. I mainly work actually on air quality with the tribe. Okanagan County has some of the worst air quality in the state of Washington, and due to changes at the EPA, as if you may have heard, perhaps from our friends at Clean Air Methow or any of the other Department of Ecology here, about a little micron called PM 2.5, which is an air pollutant that's produced by burning material. Okanagan County has some of the highest concentrations of that in the state of Washington. I think only where Yakima is running behind us just a little bit in terms of that, unfortunately. The EPA is changing the thresholds for what is called non-attainment under the Clean Air Act. And if Okanagan County enters into non-attainment, some very unfortunate things happen. And if changes aren't made, we may lose out on qualification for certain forms of federal aid. So the Conservation District works with the Colville tribes through the Okanagan River Airshed Partnership, ORAP, which includes the Methow Valley Citizens Council, Clean Air Methow, which actually now works outside of the Methow and the rest of Okanagan County. We are working on helping to reduce outdoor burning and other point sources of PM 2.5. We can't do anything about the wildfire smoke. I can't fix that at the end of the day. But we can reduce outdoor burning and make folks aware of ways that they can dispose of green waste other than burning it through, some folks may have heard or seen about our chipping events that we provide, or the events at the Twist transfer station that are run by NVCC and Clean Air Methow, but financed by the Conservation District. That is all about reducing outdoor burning and giving folks alternatives to getting rid of their wildfire fuels that they need to get rid of, not only to protect their homes, but just, it's their general landscape. It's spring, we got to get that gone kind of stuff. So that's kind of the crux of our current relationship with the tribe. I also do projects that are on the reservation that are not actually in coordination with the tribal government.
Fantastic. Yeah, my daughter is really into permaculture and just working hard on turning our piece of property like into a permaculture design, overall design. And she buries all of the branches, that we need to cut, or a tree falls down or whatnot, and she'll cut it up and then bury it and create this hugelkultur to plant, to plant out, and all that debris soaks up the water and kind of acts like a sponge. So that's another option instead of chipping and trying to take it off site. And that was one of the biggest things when we've helped our Met How at Home members with their fire mitigation projects. It's just like separating into all the different components and get it off site is huge. That's a really expensive and time consuming effort.
It can be quite a challenge, but thankfully with this non-attainment issue possibly coming up in Okanagan County, the Department of Ecology has actually elected. We currently have a prevent non-attainment grant from Ecology. These grants were previously available across the whole state for the next state biennium, so biennium 23 through biennium for 25. $2.5 million worth of funding will be available only in Okanagan County to fund chipping events, public outreach and education, to fund the tribes and Clean Air Methow's wood stove conversion, repair, or replacement programs, and things like that. All of these can make a hunk, not only in terms of the chipping events and reducing wildfire risk, but helping to improve our air quality. Because PM 2.5 issues, it has a lot of negative health impacts in that moment. It can lead to folks developing COPD, our children, the elderly, and those who have acute respiratory illnesses are significantly impacted by it. And also it could even lead to birth defects. So it's ultimately a source of pollution that, even if we were not entering into the risk of being in violation of certain rules under the Clean Air Act, is something that we need to reduce as a community. So yeah, chipping is a
Yeah,
big.
it's fascinating how many people still burn and just don't realize, that that's really a problem.
Yep.
Yeah, any other questions out there for Eli?
Eli, hi. Thanks for all this. Pete Beglin and Shelley Wilfong, we're just starting the process of building on our property in the Rendezvous. One thing that we have looked into for years is, trying to secure insurability for building in such a high risk zone, and we're extremely interested in doing everything we can to minimize fire hazard with the choices we make in terms of building. Do you have, and obviously we'd be very interested in getting a pre-assessment. Thank you for offering that service. That sounds like a brilliant kind of thing for people to take advantage of. Do you have any anecdotal experience with insurers in terms of given this the magnitude of severe fires over the last 8 years, and how that's changed the insurance environment, that how your assessments carry weight, and also just is the opportunity that you're aware of. This isn't your thing, but from insurance companies to provide insurance before completion of a home. Our experience has been that the insurance companies have, when we've asked, have said, well, we'll come out and make a determination after your house is built. And obviously there's going to be fire risk prior to that. And it's uncomfortable for folks to commit to home building before they know that they have confirmation that they're insurable. So does the work that you do seem to, I would assume, carry a fair amount of weight with those determinations?
It's a very, it's a complicated relationship, unfortunately. The very first risk assessment I ever did actually was up in Lost River. And then about 5 months later, the owners of that property called me again and said, we had to come out. Our insurance agent is actually, we are at risk of losing our coverage, and our insurance agent is asking that you come back again and assess to see the changes that we have made. And we did that, and they kept their insurance, and those folks were insured under Allstate. And so we've had multiple times over the last year or so where we've had property owners coming to us and saying, whoever the hell, Allstate, State Farm, some of the other smaller firms, saying, you're in a fire risk area. If you don't have someone come out and assess your home, you will be dropped from your coverage by XYZ date. And it puts the conservation district in an awkward position, is that I never guarantee that a home is going to be resistant to wildfire. I make recommendations. I don't make guarantees. Wildfire is a unusual force on the landscape. It does things that we don't expect. So it puts us in possibly a bit of legal liability if, we are saying this home is resistant to wildfire and then it does burn. So we are worried about the legal implications of that. But it does appear that for the insurance companies, my word as a wildfire resiliency and programmer and inspector, I guess, does have weight. We've had conversations with the Department of Natural Resources and with the State Insurance Commission about how insurers are treating folks living on these wildfire-prone landscapes. In the last couple of years, an issue has come up is that the modeling has developed. And so insurance companies are using modeling for wildfire risk that don't take into account on-the-ground factors. Or they just look at satellite images and make a guess. I had a gentleman call me for an assessment up near Wanacott Lake by Tenasket, and he brought me out and he says, Eli, are there trees overhanging my home? And the nearest tree was 50 feet away from his house. The insurance company was looking at satellite images, and we're seeing the shadows of the trees on his roof. And they were telling him that he needed to chop down those trees because they were overhanging his house.
Wow.
So there is a lot of peculiarity going on here, unfortunately, and you know, the insurers, it's their business. You know, they have to make money, but it is becoming extremely disadvantageous for folks to try to get insurance here in Okanagan County when it comes to wildfire. So unfortunately, I don't have good answers. Like I said, it appears that my word and my recommendations do have some weight for some insurers who are encouraging their insurees to come get an assessment, or else they get dropped from their coverage. But this is an issue that is going to keep building and building and building, and I don't quite know what the solution is. It's not a solution that the conservation district can really, this is a national issue. It's a California, it's a Washington, it's an Oregon, it's an Idaho. It's similar to flood insurance after Katrina. You know, it's why it's, you know, the major hurricanes in the early 2000s is why federally mandated flood insurance is required. You can go to any insurer in the country and they will have to sell you flood insurance. There is no such law for wildfire impact insurance. And until we get to that point, it's a game that we don't even know the rules to fully. So I wish I had a more satisfactory answer that was a bit more coherent, but it's just the situation that there is no real coherent way to understand it right now.
No, that was very helpful. That was very helpful. Thank you. How would we go about scheduling a pre-construction assessment with you?
Well, good. Happy you asked. I can. So I'm going to post this link in the chat here. So this will take y'all to our wildfire page, and you will see on the left-hand side, there is request a risk assessment. Click on that, you plug in that sheet, and either myself or Dylan will give you a call in a couple of days and schedule a time. It's pretty easy. All we need is, you know, your name, your address, and preferably the address of the property. Sometimes folks give me a PO box and they're just like, well, I'm not going to inspect the post office, so where do I go? And things like that, and we'll just come right on out. I will not be available personally. I will be traveling on vacation for a family thing in Virginia and then to a thing in Maine here in the next couple of weeks. But even if we're not able to get you within the longest wait time, especially we like it when folks request during the summer and spring as opposed to during the winter because we can't get out. But if you're requesting this time of year, typically our turnaround is maybe 2 to 3 weeks between request and us coming out. Or sometimes if you catch us on a good day, we can come out the next. So that's just follow that link there. And then also on the subject of links, I mentioned I'd post it here. I'm going to also paste in the link to that DNR plant guide.
Yeah, also in terms of insurance, you know, I work with Melbourne, our local insurance folks, and because I just got discontinued from my home fire insurance plan, and then they found me another company. So they're really great to work with.
And I've met people here in Okanagan County who just could not get to the point where they had to go get plans from Lloyd's of London to insure their homes. So that this is becoming a major issue, and how it comes to a head, I do not know, but it needs to be figured out.
Yeah. Okay, we are at 10. Any other quick questions for Eli? Super. Eli, what a great presentation. I really appreciate it. We'll be sharing this on the Met How at Home YouTube channel. Hopefully more folks will tune in with it. And I'm really grateful for your time. Thanks everyone for coming. And good luck with your projects. And yeah, let's stop burning our yard waste.
Very good. Thank you all so much.
We did not want to go into non-compliance or whatever that was. Non-attainment.
Non-attainment. Not a good thing.
Let's not do that.
Thank you all.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
All right. Take care.